Joe Budden slams Andrew Schulz for his race-baiting humor.
It's not just people dislike Schulz. A lot of people feel like he should be the last one to do any racial negative, black racial undertone black people used to get by yada. He should be the last one to do that because of his
affiliation with the culture.
His entryway, his affiliation. Y'all be so politically correct. Show.
On the Patreon that Joe released just recently, Dancing Bear, that's the name of the episode, Joe Budden would go on to bring up an issue he's always had with Andrew Schulz by saying that he utilizes comedy to get off racist type of undertones. It all kind of popped off when Imani was espousing how even though Andrew Schulz is divisive, he kind of thinks he has a little flair to his comedy. And then Joe rips the Band-Aid off because he kind of felt like Imani was half-stepping with his point and just started saying, if it's F Andrew Schulz, I'm going to say it. I will say it. I'm not afraid to say it. And then over the next 24 or 5 minutes of that podcast episode, they start going in to their issues with Ice and Imani kind of defending Andrew Schulz, and then Mark Lamont, Melissa Ford, and Joe Budden going at Andrew Schulz, with Joe Budden being the largest voice. So Joe says it isn't necessarily comedy and that the Rogan tree Schulz is coming from is making jokes as racist policies seem to be on the rise in terms of things like Elon Musk recent actions where he made a very crazy opinion about how Derek Chauvin should be released. And then Mark Lamont even chimes in by saying that he can't give Andrew a pass because he proclaims to know a lot about Black history, but then plays dumb when making these types of comments. Then Joe brings up how Schulz kind of doubled down on the Breakfast Club and, said that his joke about Kendrick was warranted when he said he would take his manhood based on what Kendrick said, highlighting that Kendrick said that people should slide on him, and that was basically him inciting violence. This is what Andrew said on the Breakfast Club, and Joe once again took issue with that because that is a racial undertone of buck breaking, which he feels like Andrew should not be engaging in because of how he got in the culture on the shoulders of Charlemagne. Joe then clowns Ice when he says that people just dislike Schulz because they don't like him. They have like negative feelings towards him. And it gets a little dicey because Joe uses racially motivated language against Ice. I'm not going to repeat it. And then he once again makes the point that Andrew Schulz should not be the one making those types of jokes because of how he entered the culture. There's this theory that Andrew entered, the hip hop sphere via Charlemagne, but I gotta tell you, even though that may be true, he did use Charlemagne to get into the culture. If you go back and listen to old Brilliant Idiots episodes, he kind of did the same thing he's been doing now. He's just way more popular, so the platform is bigger, which is why I think it leads to more visibility and people having such a backlash. Then Joe says that he's seen Andrew Schulz treat other cultural denominations differently. And Joe then says there's a lot of comedians hiding racism behind jokes. And then Ice once again defends Andrew's Kendrick joke, saying that Andrew meant he was big and he could take Kendrick in a fight, and that's why he could take his manhood, and that it wasn't necessarily tied to any type of racial undertone. But I guess the point Joe is trying to make is it doesn't matter if that was his goal. It still came off a certain way based on the history of this country. And then Imani kind of does the same thing that Ice was doing, defending Andrew, saying that Kendrick wasn't necessarily defending the culture by saying attack Schulz because he possibly could have incited violence against Andrew, which also was problematic. So in a sense, I guess Imani was saying that Andrew was warranted in the shot that he took back at Kendrick. Now, I think we need to look back at Joe and Andrew's back and forth over the years. This all, to me, kind of popped off when they sat down on Brilliant Idiots. And in my opinion, Andrew verbally got the better of Joe. I mean, he would, clown Joe and say, like, you're not making any points. This was back when I think Joe called Charlemagne a puppet, and Andrew ran to his defense. Now, I got to be honest. Andrew was a Charlemagne D writer at this point. He will defend that man like that is his firstborn. I think if there was a choice between saving Charlemagne or his firstborn, Andrew would choose Charlemagne. I think Andrew cries deeply for Charlemagne just out of how much he loves him. He probably loves Charlemagne so much it pains him. But after that sit down on the Brilliant Idiots, Joe would have the last laugh by refusing to have Andrew join the Joe Budden podcast in his sit down with Charlemagne.
Andrew's very upset he couldn't be here, by the way. Like really upset. Andrew, I did not invite you here, number one, because I had no desire to speak with you. Number two, your presence would have made this a Brilliant Idiots mashup again. Number three, Charlemagne and I had some history that I would like us to get to. You particularly don't have anything to do with that. I saw you tweeting that I was scared.
I think he was shook.
I think that Andrew overestimates his intelligence and underestimates my arrogance.
Issues between the two would reach a fever pitch when Andrew would say that Joe demanded $250 million from Spotify when they were going through renegotiations.
And then I heard from the grapevine that Joe asked Spotify for $250 million.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Wait, what?
Is this a reliable grapevine?
This is a reliable grapevine that he asked Spotify for $250 million.
But let me know what you think. Do you think Joe Budden has valid critiques of Andrew, or is he simply using cultural talking points because he has personal issues with Andrew Schulz? I gotta be honest, man. I think what Joe's saying, a lot of it is right, but I question his motivation. Joe's the type of guy that will say Andrew Schulz is racially bad, like he makes racial jokes, but then champion people like Leor Cohen, right? Leor Cohen has said some wild stuff over the years about, how he markets rap music, and he acts like he loves that guy, and the way he defends it is like, oh no, Leor Cohen, he was a road manager for the Beastie Boys. That's how much a part of the culture he is. That's my point. Is Joe Budden being genuine, or is he just using cultural talking points to disarm an enemy of his in the media? And to close this, I must say I don't see Andrew replying, mostly because he's just popular now. Now, a lot of people are going to say, Danny, why are you riding Andrew like that? I just look at the numbers, man. Andrew's super popular. He's selling out MSG. He is appearing on WWE, and he's grown past having to reply to Andrew Schulz. And I remember seeing him on a couple of podcasts. He never really addresses him. But like I've said before, let me know what you think in the comments. Another interesting part of this episode is Joe was dissing Imani. I think he was trying to tell him, hey, man, you got to podcast a little bit better. The way you intro in topics and then you play it safe, I don't know, you kind of half-stepping. So just watch that. It was something I noticed in this episode. And I want to close by asking for all of you to leave a comment about what you think about this back and forth. Did you see the Patreon episode? I do find it interesting that they dropped a Patreon episode the day before their Friday release. I think that's because the Joe Budden podcast is releasing Pod Wives, and they know there's a large section of the Joe Budden podcast fan base that the last thing they want to see on a Friday is Pod Wives. These people pay $25. They want to see some damn podcast. And there's a big part of the audience that doesn't want to see Joe talk to his woman about his sexual escapades. All right, y'all. That's my video for now. Follow me on Instagram to Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter to Stop TV. Follow me on Patreon to Stop. We got a lot of good content there. I'm telling you, man, there's like tons of content, hours of streams, hours of spaces, hours of think pieces. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. I mean, there was a time when I launched my Patreon, I was like, man, I don't know if there's enough content. But now there's no way that I feel like that anymore. All right, this is Danny from The Stop. Peace.